So welcome everybody to the Quiet Crisis webinar, what government job seekers actually want. You may have read last year's version of this report or attended last year's webinar. This is the 2023 version of that, but we are excited to present new data, new insights, and new best practices that you can take home with you. And hopefully make some progress in recruiting that top talent. We know it's a challenging market out there. Before we get started, let's talk about some welcome items, some housekeeping items. As I mentioned at the top of the call, you should be able to see that control panel on the right side of your screen. You can add questions or comments there throughout the webinar, and that's important because we will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. And we want to answer as many of your questions as possible. So go ahead and ask your questions there if anything comes up while we're talking. You can also use the control panel to adjust your audio settings. You'll be able to see the audio drop-down box. And tomorrow you'll be receiving an email with a link to a recording of the presentation and a copy of the presentation slides. So if you feel like there's a section you want to dive more into, you'll be able to do that tomorrow when you get the slide deck. And if you have any questions after the webinar is over, you can reach us at contact@neogov.com. Again, that's contact@neogov.com. But let's introduce our panelists. So we know where they're from, but here's who they are. Michelle Klein, welcome. Thank you for being on the call. She is our Director of Product, specifically for the Recruit module and eForms. And we have Robert Hansen, the Employment Bureau Chief for the Iowa Department of Administrative Services. Rob, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time.
You bet. Glad to be here.
And I'm Mike Tannian. I'm the Director of Content Marketing at NEOGOV. I'll be moderating this webinar, and I'll also just be introducing a few of the initial slides before handing it off to Michelle and Rob. So without further delay, let's talk about the agenda for the webinar. We'll start with a bird's eye view of public sector hiring trends, then transition into a discussion about the current labor market. After that, we'll explore what government job seekers actually want, and we're phrasing it that way because we may have assumptions about what job seekers want, but this section is going to help you make data-driven decisions because, as we'll see, sometimes our assumptions don't line up with the data. And lastly, as we go through what job seekers want, topic by topic, we'll also discuss best practices for recruiting top talent. So we'll be going through a lot of data in this webinar, and this is where it comes from. In the first section, as we talk about overarching trends, we'll be referencing data from this first category, 45 million plus government applications in Insight, which, as many of you know, Insight is our applicant tracking system. In the second section, as we talk about the labor market, we'll be using data from our HR Leaders survey. And from that point forward, we'll be referencing data from our survey of over 850 government job seekers, again, to see what they're really looking for in a public sector job. So let's take a look at some of these overarching public sector trends. I'd say it can be summed up in 4 words: more openings, less applications. We're going to look at some data, but I want to go through it quick because I know you've all experienced these challenges and I don't want to belabor the point. So if we look at jobs and applications compared to 2020, the blue line represents jobs, the red line represents applications. And you can see that steep increase in jobs over the past 3 years. Meanwhile, applications has just remained steady. It's remained stagnant. And what we don't see here is 2019 data. If there was 2019 data included in this chart, we'd actually see a 26% decrease in applications between 2019 and 2020. So they dipped in that time span and they still haven't recovered. So Rob, with this chart in mind, I wanted to ask you, does this data align with what you've been seeing in Iowa?
Certainly, from 2019 to 22, it's very much in line. It's a story for most of us, I would imagine, on this call. But a slight a good thing is we're staying on top of our data on a month-to-month basis to give us a better idea of where we need to spend our resources. And we're seeing a bit of an uptick in 2023 already. So about 13.5% through the first 7 months of 2023 on our applications. Now our requisitions continue to climb. So they're more applicants, but still more requisitions.
Okay. Well, that's exciting news. I'm glad to hear you guys have seen an uptick in applicants. I know that can be rare in today's public sector market. So I'm excited, and I think our audience will be excited as well to hear what it is you're doing differently that has led to that uptick in applications over the past several months. But if we look at this chart, let's see what this means for your jobs. So it makes sense. If jobs are increasing and applications are staying the same, we're going to see a decrease in applications per job. And that's exactly what we see here. If we look at the past 3 years, this trend has led to a 52% decrease in applications per job since 2020. And in the past year alone, and by that I mean Q1 of this year compared to last year, we see a 17% decrease in applications per job. So we can look at the data all we want, and data is great, but what does this look like on a practical level? Well, this scenario might sound familiar. Due to a growing wave of retirees and employees leaving for the private sector, you're facing staff shortages. Employees are working harder and longer to compensate for these shortages, but over time they're burning out and leaving your agency maybe earlier than planned. As employees leave, HR tries to fill critical roles, but there aren't enough qualified applicants to compensate for turnover rates. So this is a reality that's true for many government agencies across the country. And to get a clearer picture of this challenge, let's zoom into the data for Q1 of this year. All right, so this chart breaks down Q1 data by quartiles, and we can see that 50% of the jobs are only getting an average of 5.5 applicants per job. How did I arrive at that number? We're looking at the 50% to the left of the bell curve. So the average of the first and second quartile, that 3 and that 8. So an average of 5.5 applicants per job. And this is just the number of applicants. It doesn't factor in whether they're qualified or not. So when you factor in qualified applicants, the number is even lower than 5.5. In contrast, the top 25% of jobs receive 70 applicants on average. Chances are, if you're in this webinar, your jobs are not in the 25%, the top 25%, or at least not all of them. Maybe some of them are, right? There's going to be a mix. If that's the case, first off, you're not alone. Clearly, this is a widespread problem in the public sector. But second of all, you're attending the right webinar because Michelle and Robert have some actionable insights to share with you, and I'm gonna hand it over to them now.
All right, thanks, Mike. As Mike discussed, many government agencies are stuck in a cycle of burnout and turnover. So we're going to be discussing some best practices for breaking that cycle. But first, we want to explore some of the specific challenges that your peers in HR have been facing today. So given the increase in job openings over the last year, we need to ask, what's driving that? 82% of HR leaders said that voluntary turnover is the leading cause of job openings at their agency. And according to these HR professionals, it's caused by employees wanting more competitive pay and remote work options, as well as competition with other employers, both public and private. Retirement's also a leading cause of the recent job openings, and that's probably only going to be increasing. You've all heard of the silver tsunami. It started in the past few years, and it's far from over. It's not going to be until 2030 that all baby boomers will have reached 65 years of age. And so that means we can probably expect this trend to continue through at least the rest of this decade. With that increase in job openings, it wouldn't be as much of a problem if you could easily fill those vacancies, but finding enough qualified people has really been a major challenge, as all of you know. So we've looked at some of the data, but now we want to ask you, are you finding enough qualified candidates to fill your open jobs? We put up a poll question. We want to have you answer yes or no to that, whether or not your organization is finding enough qualified candidates. And I can probably predict what most of your answers are going to be. So we'll wait a few seconds for you to respond on that. It looks like a lot of you have voted. We have about almost 500 callers on the call right now. About 65% have voted. I want to see that number. There we go. We're at 70 now. So we can go ahead and take the poll down. What we found in our survey was that 75% of HR leaders said no, they were not finding enough qualified candidates. So Rob, I want to ask you, what are you seeing in Iowa as far as the jobs that have been the hardest ones to fill?
Yeah, certainly. A couple different tracks, financial analysts, all the way down to the accountant level in state government. We have more than 17,000 employees, so we've got a lot of accounting and financial work. Also management analysts, those helping chart the path of data and where the agency moves. We're having trouble with those. Engineers, the competition for engineers is great with the private sector. In addition, the healthcare section with CNAs and nurses, I'm certain that all of our partners on the call that hire for those jobs are in the same situation there. And those of us with correctional officers, and then certainly, you know, what gets a lot of interest across the country is the lack of ability to attract law enforcement officers. And I would say all of those in our role in Iowa to attract that wide variety of candidates, all of those are significant for us.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be pretty common with most of the other callers on the call today as well. Let's put up the results of the poll that we just asked so you can all see the results of that. So 86% of you on the call said you're finding enough qualified candidates, or that you're not finding enough qualified candidates. 14% said yes, that you are. So let's go ahead and take that down. So we found 75% in the survey we did. So that's, you know, kind of in line with that, although it seems we have more people joining this webinar who are saying, yes, indeed, it is hard to fill jobs. So not surprised by seeing that. So let's talk next about the impact of having unfilled positions. And I'm sure that many of you have firsthand experience with that. Unfilled jobs can really have a very negative impact on your organization, and including that it contributes to burnout and turnover. Other consequences might include overtime costs, project delays, and that might not be the worst of it, really. Staffing shortages have forced 20% of public sector agencies to actually reduce the services that they provide to citizens. So it's really having an impact on what you're being able to offer to your communities. So to address that challenge, we're seeing employers taking some actions in terms of offering more overtime, hiring outside contractors, and modifying hours of operation. And that's good, but those solutions they're only addressing the symptoms. They're really not addressing the root cause. And the root cause is something that we've already talked about. It's that steady decline in public sector applicants. So it really begs the question, how can you make your jobs more attractive to your job seekers? Well, it starts with really understanding what it is that your candidates want, and then providing it, and then promoting it. So let's talk about how you source candidates. To source candidates effectively, you need to know where government job seekers are looking for new jobs. The maxim is simple. You go where they go, and you build a brand presence there. In our survey, we asked job seekers where they go to find job opportunities. And as expected, government applicants preferred to go to online job boards like governmentjobs.com or Indeed. LinkedIn and employer career pages were also some popular channels. So how can we use that information to attract more qualified candidates? So I want to suggest some best practices to you for how you can best source candidates based on what that survey data is telling us. HR leaders should invest in resources in the channels that are going to deliver the most return. And as I go through each of these areas, Rob, I'm going to ask you to chime in after each one to share your thoughts on what's worked well for the state of Iowa. So first area is online job boards, posting your jobs on the best boards for the particular kinds of work that you're looking for. If that's Indeed, USA Jobs, college or state job boards, governmentjobs.com. Rob, what's your experience been with that in Iowa?
We have 16 core cabinet agencies, and we work individually with them on underperforming jobs. And certainly we finding the job boards that they're candidates. That is the most important thing we do, to spend time on those underperforming jobs. Sometimes we find that agencies are posting, but not to the right type of job board for the type of candidate they're looking for. So we try to consolidate that effort and share best practices across those 16 agencies.
Good, thanks. LinkedIn. I think it's important to develop a presence on LinkedIn. It is one of the sources that many job seekers do look for work. Highlight on LinkedIn your work culture. Share your job openings there. It's really a place where you can start to expand where you have your brand presence is on the LinkedIn employer pages. Rob, you want to talk about Iowa?
Yeah, certainly, couldn't agree more. Each of those 16 agencies that I mentioned typically have their own LinkedIn presence.
Okay.
We have smaller agencies that we post for, but the cross commenting and cross support and liking and sharing each other's posts across that recruitment network within your organization is something that we're striving for, and seeing some lower level but success nonetheless.
Yeah, definitely. Any help you get in that cross posting of people on social is going to be helpful. The next area would be your career pages, and you want to make sure that your career pages, one, are easy to find, but they're also easy to navigate, and that you include content on those that really is appealing, exciting to your candidates to make them want to work for your agency, that your value proposition as an employer shows up on your career page. Rob, thoughts on this one?
Yeah, not only your career page, but highlighting the important aspects, and we're getting ready to launch a benefit calculator that our partners in Nebraska had shared with us.
Nice.
And so we've put it to what we have going on our career page. In addition to that, we're getting ready to launch across those 16 agencies the opportunity to use a CRM, which happens to be Attract. And so we're just starting that actually at the top of the hour with our first training of our first 5 agencies here yet this afternoon.
That's exciting. That's a great segue into my next one, talking about passive candidates, where reaching out to your passive candidates, those people who have maybe applied for your organization in the past, but they're not actively looking now, reaching out to them to let them know about opportunities that you have that might be of interest to them. And that's something that, as Rob mentioned, something that our Attract product can help with. So is passive candidates a big part of what you're planning on doing with the CRM tool?
It is. A year ago, we used a company, Qualtrics, to survey our applicants over a period of time to learn more about what our applicants, most of which are unselected, most of what they're thinking about our process and about our postings and different aspects. We learned a lot from that, in addition to now reaching out to those candidates to try to steer them. Those passive candidates that aren't selected for a job they may have wanted, there's an awesome career path, across 17,000 employees and 800 classifications in the state of Iowa. So encouraging them to reach into the state and then seek and grow their opportunity for promotion.
That's awesome. All right, now that we know where they're looking for jobs, let's talk about how you can make your jobs more attractive to them, how you make them more appealing. In our December survey of over 700 HR professionals, only 6% of the respondents thought that candidates cared most about benefits. But according to our job seeker survey, 58% of job seekers thought benefits were the most important factor for choosing one job over another. So the survey results kind of contradict the assumptions of many HR professionals that salary was what matters the most. Salary was still very high. Salary, job security, and meaningful work were also top factors in the survey. Rob, I know that Iowa also did a job seeker survey recently. Can you share with us what you found in the state survey?
Yeah, certainly. Our assumption as well was that salary would lead, and it is important, but we're finding that folks are more interested in the work they will be doing, their opportunity for growth and promotion and training. So we're focusing our efforts along those meaningful work culture, career growth, remote and flexible work as the more engagement and job satisfaction areas for our employees, and encouraging all of our job postings, which we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but our job postings need to include those things when you're in active recruitment.
Yeah, you certainly want to take those top factors, and those are the things you really want to promote in your job description. I think one of the problems that we see is that job descriptions, frankly, are not, a lot of times they're not very up to date or accurate or honestly very interesting. So I think that's an area we want to talk about next, is that your job descriptions are the first impression of your agency, aside from your career pages. And if you want qualified candidates to apply, you need to include the right information for the particular job that you're recruiting for. Not taking a one-size-fits-all for every job, recognizing that what appeals to jobs or job seekers for one particular job may not be exactly the same as in another. So you want to make sure you're including the right information. There are several key elements that do make job descriptions more appealing overall, and you can see that from this survey response data of what job seekers told us. 66% of government applicants said that salary and benefits information are important on a job posting. An accurate description of the responsibilities and the career growth opportunities were also super important. And by including those elements on your job postings, candidates are going to be more likely to apply for your job. Rob, what is Iowa doing to make job postings more appealing to your candidates?
Well, our recruiting coordinator, it's one of her top initiatives, is to encourage people to make their job announcements specific and not use templates. And
Good.
again, we spend a lot of time focusing on the underperforming jobs because those are facing with an immediate need, and those are they get the most attention. But really, then encouraging them to look at those postings that they just continue to post over and over again for jobs that they have enough candidates for, but making those more specific and creative, and thinking about one of the things we try to do is think about our current employees that are succeeding. Where did they come from, and what might attract someone similar in that role already.
It's a great segue into the best practices that I want to talk about next. Your job posting should be written with your job seeker in mind, what I was just talking about, and what's going to be appealing to them. And by promoting those things that applicants care the most about, you can better attract your top talent. So the data shows that what they care about the most are benefits, job security, meaningful work, work-life balance, career growth opportunities, and work culture. You want to make sure that your benefits are clearly advertised in your posting and career page. Show them the value of benefits like pension, 401k match, health insurance. Quantify that as much as you can, as much as is reasonable to do on your job postings. Obviously, when you're promoting your organization, you can only promote your agency's strengths. So if you offer, for example, career growth opportunities, but maybe you don't really have great work-life balance, then focus on promoting the former and start improving the latter. And hopefully in the future, you'll be able to promote work-life balance as well. So whatever those things are, identify what you're strong in and try and accentuate those things. Your job description should really showcase your agency's culture, your values, your mission. And you really want your potential candidates to be able to see that and see that it's a place where they could fit, where they could contribute, where they could thrive. Rob, in your experience with this list that I went over on the bullets on this slide, which of these factors has really been the most impactful?
I think for us, it's definitely the highlighting the type of work and leaning into that desire for folks to have meaning to their work, and then certainly the work-life balance, the flexible work schedule, and having some remote option. We do have, it's agency by agency here in the state of Iowa, but most agencies employ, if possible, with 3 days in the office, 2 days remote, and that seems to be working well for a lot of folks interested in state employment.
Yeah, I like the first thing you said when you talked about, leaning into that sort of that area of work and sort of like where their passions are, doing work that makes a difference, right? Showing, capitalizing really on what it is that they want to get out of the job in terms of that intrinsic reward they get for contributing. So Now that we know how important the benefits are to job seekers, let's take a look really specifically at what benefits they said they preferred. So we learned in our job seeker survey that the top answers were flexible work hours, remote work options, and 4-day work weeks. And that was followed by extra vacation days, performance pay, bonus, tuition reimbursement. I think it's worth noting in that other category that some of the responses that we saw included things like pensions, health insurance, retirement plans, 401k match. And those are really those traditional benefits that people view as table stakes. They're things that, pretty much all public sector agencies are providing those to some degree. So those may not be the things that you want to really emphasize in your descriptions. I would focus on really drawing more attention to those benefits that differentiate your agency from others and that are going to make your jobs more competitive in that market. It's also important to think about your jobs that are the hardest to fill. This is like what Rob was talking about earlier, really putting your emphasis on those. Who do you compete with for those specific jobs? If it's corrections versus nursing versus a financial analyst, who are you competing with for those? And so based on who you're competing with, that's what you really want to draw out what your differentiating factors are for those particular job descriptions. It may be different for one than the other because you may be competing with private for some versus public for others. Providing and promoting the benefits that are going to differentiate your agency, your jobs are going to be more competitive in that market. And so the top 3 benefits in this chart that you see at the top are really the place where I would recommend starting. So let's look at those as sort of best practices. So flexible work hours. For example, you could give employees the freedom to schedule appointments during their work hours, or maybe you restructure some of your public-facing jobs to make them more flexible. Consider whether or not you could split some jobs into morning shift and afternoon shift covered by 2 different part-time workers for people that may only be interested in working part-time. Remote work, it gives employees the convenience in their personal lives. If they have kids or the occasional doctor appointment, it's easier to take care of some of those things in a remote work environment. 4-day work weeks. The idea is that employees find ways to cut waste and work more efficiently, and maybe you have like a 4-8 schedule. And so this could also be a cost savings measure as well if you have people that are interested in having a reduced work week, and they may be able to get nearly as much done in a 4-8 schedule as they would in a 5-8 schedule. So look at that as an option. Maybe consider whether or not 4-10s would be an option or 4-9s. Rob, let me just ask you, what has the state implemented in terms of flexible work arrangement?
Well, for us, the flexible and remote work is really they go hand in hand. We do encourage employers where possible. We certainly have a lot of jobs where you have to be on site all the hours, and it's
Right.
a service related. So those we can, the flexible work hours, focusing on the work being performed. I can tell you about, there's 4 teams where I am, and the team that I am fortunate to work with. We focus on the work and the work being performed, and certainly they're going to work 40 hours a week because the work demands are just there. But in terms of whether they do it in the office on a particular day or whether they do it at home that day, we try to generally leave that up to them. I personally have a request of my team that we try to work together on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but the try is very small font. If they've got something going on, it's okay for them not to be there and work with us remotely. But I do find that they've embraced that. For the most part, we all do work together on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and we have a lot of our opportunity to share that traditional work conversation, both personal and professional. And then those other days when we're remote, we spend a little less time on those conversations and a little more time on the actual work. So that's how we embrace it and encourage others in state government to do the same.
I like that, and I think that it's appealing for people applying for jobs, but I think it's also probably helps with the retention factor. When people have that degree of flexibility in their job, they're happier, and they're less likely to go to an employer that doesn't offer that level of flexibility. So these types of benefits they're going to help increase your application rate, but if you don't have an efficient hiring process, you might still miss out on top talent. So I want to switch gears now and move on to talking about the hiring process. So Mike talked earlier about the number of applicants per job has decreased by 52% in government since 2020. It's been basically cut in half. When top talent does enter your hiring pipeline, you really do need to capitalize on it, and that starts with creating a very positive candidate experience. Going back to some of our survey data, when we asked job seekers, respondents shared with us their best and their worst experiences about applying for public sector jobs. So here are some of the most informative and helpful responses that we saw. I'll just summarize. For best experiences, job seekers mentioned processes that were fair. They also liked processes where they received communication acknowledging receipt of their application materials and informing them when they weren't rejected. The processes that were easy to use and where there was visibility and transparency in the hiring process, those were things that they all liked. On the worst experiences, candidates were unhappy when there was a lack of communication about the status and the reason for not being selected. They didn't like the length of time it takes to be hired. So that's probably no surprise for all of you there. I see Rob smiling at that comment. It really only works for people if they already have a job, right? So if you're unemployed and you're looking for work, it's going to take 4 or 5 months to get hired. Most people don't have the luxury of staying unemployed for that long. They need to find something. Another area that came up that I thought was really interesting was that they didn't like the exactitude and how requirements were specified. And then perhaps that might be causing organizations to lose out on people that have the skills, they're great talent, but because of rigid requirements, they're not able to get in the door, their foot in the door. And I think they perceive that these are sometimes arbitrary minimum qualifications that have been set. So I'm wondering, do any of those things resonate with all of you on the call? I imagine some of them do. These responses are actually supported by the survey data as well, which is what I'm going to go into next. So looking at government job seekers, they're desiring the timely communication and more efficient hiring processes. For timely communication, 73% preferred a response within 2 to 4 weeks of submitting their application. And that's perceived as a reasonable amount of time for a job seeker and how long they think it would take for HR and hiring managers to view their application and follow up with the next steps. And I imagine that that's a big disconnect from reality for most of you. It may feel really fast to you as an employer with going through them applications and figuring out who is going to be best qualified. But I think it's important to understand that from a job seeker perspective, that longer period of time is a real drawback for them. So I think looking at how you can speed things up as much as possible is going to be really important. As far as the hiring process, based on those positive and negative experiences applying for the job seekers shared that the best way to improve the hiring process was, well, first of all, 40% said making the hiring process faster. 17% they said they wanted honest feedback if they weren't selected, and 16% desired frequent communication. Rob, what do you think of all that? What are your insights about that with respect to the hiring process from the survey that you did in Iowa, as well as these results?
Yeah, it certainly sounds familiar, first of all. And what we're doing is really a number of things. We want to be more in touch with our candidates. And so one of the things that the folks at NEOGOV and Michelle's team did recently was create the opportunity for a metric so that we can measure application to first notice sent. And so when we qualify, we're merit-based, as many of you probably are. So as merit-based, we have to qualify on the minimum qualifications. And so the touch base to know how soon that we're turning those things around. And so we're looking at opportunities to do that in the most efficient way. And then that launches into kind of the next phase is once a candidate is referred, we're revamping our training entirely from what we've been doing for a number of years and moving that more into a vacancy to hire training that really is an A to Z from the moment you're notified that you either have a new position or someone gives notice. That's really where the work begins. And so we're starting to focus with those hiring managers on the importance of speed and efficiency right from the jump, whatever that jump off point is. And then we're communicating with the candidates quickly and encouraging them to begin reviewing applications sooner, not to let them sit if in their inbox, especially again with underperforming jobs. Those jobs that gets lots of candidates, certainly we don't have that expectation. Although it's best practice, it might not be something they have time to do. But those low performing jobs really want to turn referred applicants into scheduled interviews and into interviews and decision making as quickly as possible, and how that leads into the candidate's visibility. They know where they are, they know what's happening because there's more frequent. So several of those items on Michelle's survey hit home as you know, kind of check those all off if you're being the most efficient you can be. So really focusing in those areas. You don't, again, you don't turn a ship our size very slow, very fast. It happens slow, but that's the areas in which we're working.
That's great. You covered a lot of the areas that I want to cover on our next slide, which is to talk about best practices. So job seekers' best and worst experience revolve around that process, the level of communication, and the hiring timeline. And by working on improvements in those areas, you can really give candidates a more positive experience with your agency, and that leads to positive feedback and a stronger reputation in the application market. And that's really essential in building that positive employer brand I mentioned a few times a little bit earlier. That's going to help you immensely in your future recruitment efforts. So if we look at this slide, these are just sort of 4 ways that you can kind of get started, and let's kind of look at these a little bit. So the timely communication we talked about, honest feedback. I think offering honest feedback to applicants if they're not selected lets them feel valued, and they become, giving them feedback that they can take action on, they can become a more successful candidate for you in the future. Also, because they've been treated with respect by being communicated with and being given constructive, helpful feedback, they're more likely to have a positive image or positive perception of your organization and share that with other people about that being a place that someone might want to work. And that just helps build your brand. Job requirements, considering applicants that don't have government experience, if they have experience in the same field in another industry, really looking more objectively at what your requirements are and are looking to find people that have the skills that you're looking for, maybe not being as rigid around those job requirements that you have. And then remembering your top talent, remembering those people who did apply. They may not have been the finalist that was selected, but they, you know, hopefully you gave them some good feedback and they might be better in the future. But you could also, you know, look at those people that weren't qualified before and they might be qualified in the future, or they might be qualified for a different job. So remembering who those top candidates were. Rob, what are practices that you're focusing on to get good candidates to apply for your opening? You talked a little bit about this on the previous one. Anything you want to add to that?
In the job requirements, we have 3 different ways we can post in our state. We can post in the individual agency, in the state, across all the agencies, or out to all interested. And we encourage our agencies to cast the widest net possible from the very beginning. I mean, you're just not sure who from internal is going to apply, and so if you don't get a good internal candidate base, you've got to start over with a new posting, and that leads you right back to the timeliness of filling your vacancy. So, and then remembering top talent. For years and years, agencies have been just kind of keeping that in their own pocket in a spreadsheet and referring to it when they might have an opening. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're really excited to be able to have a CRM and launch that. And that's going to make it so much easier for us and our agencies to keep track of those members. I just hired for a job recently and sent my teammate 3 names, I believe, of folks that would have been great fills, just wasn't who we selected. And so she'll be working and to ensure that we stay connected to those folks through campaigns and opportunities that are going to come up in the future, not just in our agency, but across the other agencies as well.
That's great. All right, so we've covered best practices in a number of areas, and so I want to do a quick poll on which of these areas you think you want to focus on within your organization. So we'll put the poll question up here. Which of these best practices do you want to implement first? So we've talked about all these throughout this webinar: increasing your candidate sourcing channels, updating your job descriptions or job postings to be more appealing, improving the application and hiring process, offering more competitive benefits, all of the above. So yeah, maybe you're going to look at all of them, but I'm kind of curious which ones you plan on implementing first. While people are still responding on that, Rob, maybe you want to let us know how would you answer that for Iowa? What would you say is probably the thing you want to focus on first?
Well, I'm smiling because you have to focus on the things that you have some opportunity to influence, and
True.
offering more competitive benefits is outside of the lane of me and my team. So we don't spend a lot of time there unless we're asked into other conversations. But certainly, I mentioned we're improving our hiring timeline and encouraging our hiring managers to consider it as a vacancy to hire viewpoint instead of kind of a posting period and then an interview period and then an evaluation period of who you might hire. That job sourcing in terms of where you're finding them from is and making sure you're in the right lane for the right people. We focus there.
Mm-hmm.
And our job announcements for sure. Our job descriptions could use work, as you mentioned, and a lot of times in government they can. But our job announcements are where we call out what that job's really all about and the kinds of things that it's going to do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, let's go ahead and share the poll results. I think the poll results kind of align with your comments as well. Like, a very few felt that they could really do much around offering more competitive benefits, but we're seeing like 32% said all of the above, 25% said improving the application and hiring process, 23% updating job descriptions, 15% increasing candidate sourcing channels. So that's really interesting results to see from all of you on the call. Thanks for voting on putting your information into the poll for us all. With all of these things in mind, I want to share some resources that you might find helpful as you think more about the information and how to apply it with your own within your own organization. So we've got a few things we're going to pop up on the screen, and one of our team members is also going to put this in the chat pane, so you'll have links there if you want to grab those and bookmark them. The first is linked to NEOGOV's 2023 Quiet Crisis Report. A lot of the content we've talked about today, you'll find that in that report. Second is NEOGOV's recruiting report on 5 best practices for recruiting top talent. And then finally, we hope that you will join us at our annual user conference, Ignite, and we'll share some details with you about the Ignite conference. So we'll pop that slide up next. The Ignite conference it's just over a month away in Las Vegas, Nevada, and you can use your phone camera to scan that big QR code on the right side if you want to get a link to go to the conference website. We have over 1,100 people registered for the conference. It's the biggest one ever. And we hope to see many of you there as well. And if you do come to the conference, we hope that you'll come up and introduce yourself to all of us. We'd love to meet you. So, Mike, I know that you've been watching for incoming questions while Rob and I have been talking. And do we have any questions that you want to have either Rob or I respond to?
Yes, we do. Let me get to those in 1 second. I just want to thank you both, Rob and Michelle. This information was so valuable, and I hope it was valuable to everyone who's on the call. Let's dive into some of your questions. We'll get to as many as we can. All right, to start off, Rob, Michelle, do you have any tips for updating the minimum qualifications of a job? It's kind of a two-part question. And could this lead to an increase in hiring without compromising standards?
I definitely think it can. And I think that whenever you are in a job market where it's difficult to find people for positions, that you have to really take a step back and take a look at everything you're doing in your process. And one of those areas is the minimum qualifications. And for a long time, we've really held to those fast as something that you really want to be consistent about because it helps keep you out of legal trouble and so on. But in a market where you don't have very many candidates applying for jobs anymore, I think it's important to really reassess that, maybe look at some skills-based hiring opportunities and maybe not being as rigid around what you are looking at as far as education and experience requirements and looking at people really have the skills to do the job. Rob, I'd love to hear your take on that. What's your opinion about that?
Certainly, we almost on a weekly basis, we receive some inquiries from our agencies about particular classes and the minimum qualifications, and we be as aggressive as we can be in adjusting them. We do have to ensure in a multi-class series, there's a lot of considerations tied to the job evaluation score, which leads us to a compensation class. So we've got a lot of interconnected pieces. But we are as aggressive as we can be when we see opportunities. One of the things that we see pretty routinely is adding, as degree paths and courses of study have changed. Those that require educational levels, we see an increase in adding either more degree paths that weren't previously considered for a job, or moving to a generic, any degree where possible for those jobs where really any education level in a bachelor's degree or even an associate degree would previously might have been specific. We open that up to more general and then allow agencies to screen when they have the opportunity to identify those candidates that maybe have the educational level that they prefer as a part of the screening.
Good. Thanks, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you both. A second question, Rob, I know you have some history in law enforcement. Would you have any advice for attracting law enforcement officers for those agencies that are maybe struggling in that area?
Yeah, I do. I spent about 34 years in a sworn capacity and in leadership with the Iowa State Patrol for a number of those years, and so it's a constant and sustained effort that's required. It's really, and I know several people on the call that recruit for law enforcement officers. It's really something you need to be doing every single week anymore, because you got to find that one candidate. If it's one candidate a week, you're improving your agency's opportunity to be staffed at the level that's necessary. And we're launching and working with Iowa's Jobs for America's Graduates, which is a middle school and high school programs in the communities across the state that are encouraging students that may or may not be candidates for education beyond, and encouraging them and introducing them to all types of work, including law enforcement, but also correctional officers and highway maintenance and engineers and different avenues. So we're growing that program really on a weekly basis with our agencies, and really no stone unturned is where you have to be with law enforcement recruitment. The non-traditional avenues, you're also seeing in law enforcement that the span that folks spend in it is no longer a guaranteed career or 25 years. So you're going to find that you're going to be recruiting more so for those folks, maybe even after 10 years. So it's not going anywhere, and a long, sustained, long game is the way we have to approach it.
Makes sense. All right, sifting through some of the questions. All right, if our agency is in a negative state currently, how would you recommend balancing promoting a job to top talent with transparency and honesty? So maybe not misleading applicants into thinking your culture is something that it's not, but still appealing to them in some way.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think it is important to be honest about what your organization is. But I think in most organizations, even if there are some areas that are problematic, there probably still are some good differentiators there. Maybe you're highlighting something about the community, about the location. I dig deep and look for what you can call out that is accurate, true, that would still be appealing. But definitely work on fixing those things that are going to make that a good place to work. Any added thoughts, Rob?
Oh, that's a tough spot to be in.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, stick with the positives. That's just the best advice, and because that's what you have to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, another question, and this is related to those preferred benefits we mentioned from our survey that highlighted flexible work options, remote work, 4-day work week. How do you offer preferred benefits to police or fire? How do you make a job more appealing to them?
Want me to start?
I can chime in on this one. You go ahead. You can start, and I'll add any thoughts.
Well, there's, for me, there's two answers. One is if you're signing up to be a first responder, there has to be some level of understanding that you got to be there. You got to be on the job. Then working with those, oftentimes you're working, at least in our state, you're working with the union, and you've got to work on work schedules that balance. I give you an example of evolution. 35 years ago, I worked 2 more days a month than they work now. They always have a 3-day weekend. That's how it's changed as a way for them to attract more interest and be competitive with the work schedules within our state. So I used to work 12 out of 14 days consecutive, and they don't have to do that anymore. And so that's one way that they've evolved. And certainly in those cases, some of those preferred benefits are that we're seeing. That doesn't mean that I'm certainly not advocating for it. Each governmental organization has to, but that premium overtime is really something that for filling shifts. I think it's not a flexible work schedule, or obviously not remote, but there's other ways to incentivize those positions, and it's either in schedule or compensation.
I gave a presentation at last year's user conference on hiring law enforcement positions. And I'm trying to remember the specifics on this one particular organization that I interviewed. It was an organization in Virginia. And they were talking about how even in law enforcement, people desire some degree of flexibility. They have kids playing soccer and want to make it to a game, and all the same kind of stuff that the rest of us do, right? And they were talking about how they had come up with a schedule that their employees really loved. And I don't remember exactly how the schedule worked. It was a little bit unusual, but it was like over a 2-week period or 3-week period, how many days they would work. But they worked out that where, like every other weekend, you would get a 3-day weekend the way it worked out. And you'd work a lot of hours in between, and some of the days were long. But it did give people some degree of flexibility to where they felt like they had family time or time to do things that they wanted to do as part of their personal life. So I think even in law enforcement, I think there are some opportunities, although it may be more limited than for a lot of other jobs. I think there are opportunities to look for flexibility where it's going to create a more desirable experience for your employees.
Thank you both. Another question. How can we build recruitment sources for passive candidates within our own community?
That sounds like a pitch for me to share about the Attract product that we have. So for passive candidates, with the government job site, we do ask job seekers if they want to have their information shared with other employers that might be interested. And the Attract product will allow you to mine that data from the government jobs database, either manually or using our virtual recruiter, which would automate outreach to candidates that are in the government jobs network, as well as your own past candidates. So I think that that's a great way to do outreach to them, sending them emails to let them know about opportunities that are coming up.
Okay, and we have several questions around feedback and providing honest feedback and some of the challenges around that. So
yeah.
Rob, Michelle, can you speak to that challenge?
It's a tough one, and I think Rob would probably agree, it's a bit of a two-edged sword, right? You say too much and you don't say it in the right way, it can kind of backfire on you. It's also a labor-intensive thing to do. I certainly think that it's worth making an effort to give people honest feedback, particularly if they're in your top candidate pool but they weren't selected, or if it's somebody you think may have potential in the future, if they knew what things that they should address. So I think having the ability to do that would be good. I think your staff have to be trained well in terms of how to provide that feedback in a way that's going to be constructive and not be more detrimental to your brand. Rob, would you add anything?
Yeah, exactly. Where I'm at, I can give a personal experience. We hired a coordinating recruiter recently and had a couple of military personnel from, not even from Iowa, but they wanted to live in Iowa. They had served, and both had served in Iowa for a short period of time, and they wanted to come there and raise their children. And so that really struck me. They didn't have the skills necessarily, especially as compared to other candidates, and one particular candidate in for sure the one we hired. But I offered both of them the opportunity in their when I let them know we didn't hire them. One of them took advantage of it, and I scheduled 30 minutes about two weeks down the road because that's when I could do it, and we jumped on, and I encouraged him. I essentially recruited him to look at other positions. He wanted to do recruiting. He liked recruiting, and I said, that's great, but come take a look at the book of jobs that are open and find something that we can get you into that back here in the state, and then you'll prove that through your work you'll prove that the opportunity for promotion. So that's kind of how those that really aren't candidates for the particular job, that's a very difficult thing, and not a place where I would certainly take a call and take a question, but I don't offer it in those cases, and wouldn't encourage our hiring managers because that's a tough spot to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that point though, Rob. Like, how can you leverage constructive, honest feedback to bring someone into another position at your company that they might be a better fit for, and you're solving a future challenge too for that other role. All right, what's a better technique? Funneling applicants into a landing page about your company and then to government jobs, or just sending them directly to government jobs to apply? What's your opinion on that, Michelle?
I personally would think I would have them go to the career page, because that's where you're going to set up your employer brand. I mean, government jobs is a place they may go if they're not looking for any particular organization that they're looking for, and I certainly think there's benefits in doing that. I mean, as NEOGOV, we love people going through governmentjobs.com because they might opt into that network to share their profile with other employers. But for your organization, I would say it's probably best to point them to your own career site where you're pitching your own employer brand.
Yeah, certainly. For those that don't organically begin at our job site on their own, that's what we'll be doing with the tract, is trying to generate interest and send some information, receive interest from others that will generate information and bring them to our career landing pages, which will ultimately then lead them out to our job site. But really driven by the individual. Are they seeking information, or do they already know where they want to go? And so we would encourage both, but try to help them navigate that process through the career pages.
That's great. So I have one more question. I know we're at time. I do want to sneak in this one last question though. I think it would be a good way to cap our webinar. Do you have any advice on effective ways to communicate with elected, appointed officials about the importance of making changes to benefits and compensation for positions that are continually difficult to fill?
Let's start with this one, Rob, or do you want me to?
Sure. For me, it's easy. It's two things. It's relationships and data. You have to build
better.
Yeah, you have to build wins with the people that you serve, both your customers and, in this case, your elected officials. And then for me, it's data. They got to see the benefit, whether it's savings. Those are the better conversations to have. But even when you're asking to spend money, it's still the data. What's the cost? For me, it's how can you build the cost benefit analysis, and whether it's tangible or just conceptual, there's still a cost benefit analysis conversation to have with folks, and the relationships is what gets you kind of in the door and past the first few sentences.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think with what you said about data, I would say is so true. I think as HR professionals, we so often try to influence decision making based on our anecdotal experiences that don't seem to be as compelling to people who make the monetary decisions as having the actual data behind that. So I would say I would focus on that. At our user conference, Reed Walsh, who is a former HR professional from the state of Pennsylvania, she's now a NEOGOV people experience manager. She is going to be presenting on how to, and I forget the actual name of the topic, Mike, I don't know if you have this handy, but Reed will be, talking about how to get support from executives for the decision, for decisions you need for products to support your initiative. So I think that would be a great session to attend if you're able to join the conference.
Yes, I'm trying to look up the name of that right now. I'm not going to be able to find it, and I don't want to keep us too long on here, unfortunately. But thank you to everyone who attended. We hope this was valuable. We hope it was helpful. Just a reminder, you will be getting a recording of this as well as the slide deck tomorrow via email. And thank you to Rob and Michelle for joining us on the webinar. So insightful. Can't wait for the next time. Have a good one. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.